My name is Julian Schnabel, and I'm talking with
Nate Parker.
Who am I talking to? I'm talking to Nate Parker. And that's really what I wanted to do since I saw his film, American Skin. The other night, my wife and I were, we get the Academy app because I'm a member of the Academy. And we were just going through, we jumped around, we shuffled around, but we started and we went back through the A's and we saw the words American Skin, and hadn't heard anything about the film, but pressed play and watched it. And after seeing the film, we were so excited that we couldn't sleep. You spend your life looking at things, waiting for something, seeing things, accepting things that might not be as great as you wish they could be, being polite on occasion, hoping that things will get to a certain point. And then you see something where somebody does something that's so clear and brilliant that you think, wow, it was worth it to stay here looking at this TV screen. And then this sense of responsibility came over us. I speak for Louise now also, who wrote and edited the movie At Eternity's Gate with Jean-Claude Carrier and me. And we felt like we needed to talk to Nate Parker. I wanted to talk to Nate Parker. And so I want to talk about this film, which I think is the best film of not only this year, but it really touched me in the same way that a great John Cassavetes film would, or The Battle of Algiers, or Pichoch by Hector Babenco, things that have affected my life. And at this moment in time, I feel like this is probably the most important film that anyone could watch. And so I'd like to talk about the film. That's what I like to do, Nate. Talk about your film.
Well, thank you very much. It's to be mentioned alongside of the names that you mentioned is an honor, you know, and I'm honored to be on here with you. You know what I mean? It's not every day you get a call from someone who is such a respected artist, you know. So, you know, thank you for watching the film. Thank you for wanting to talk. Thank you for reaching out. I'm so happy we could put this together.
What else do I have to do? I'm unemployed. And I'm unemployed. Well, all right, so I don't want to give the story away for people that haven't seen your movie, but I want to set the stage for talking about your movie. And then I want you to talk about it. So there's the stage is set so you could break down boundaries, alter the narrative, and give voices to people that need to have voices, and permit them somehow to contribute their voice. And so I'd like to talk about that, and then we could talk about how you did it later. But so my first comment is not really, it's really more of a statement, and then you could comment on that. And I wanted to say and I thought about this a bit, so I wrote something down. By commandeering a precinct and stripping the police officers of their often misguided sense of power over people, they're forced to ditch their indoctrinated ideologies and use their own minds to consider truth and justice. For some, walls of that skewed ideology have to be scaled or broken through just to have a conversation with a police officer without being questioned, detained, or otherwise. While commandeering a precinct is not practical, safe, or advised, the power of that imagery in your film has resonance as it gives voice to the question, is this what it's going to take to get some empathy, to be seen as a person of consequence, or to get justice? So I thought that was an ingenious thing to have this take place in a precinct where all of a sudden the rules of the outside world are thrown out the window.
Mm-hmm.
And another thing, so I'd like to talk about that, and I'd like you to talk about that. So let's start with that, and then I'll throw another one at you.
Well, thank you. You know, for me, there's so much conversation about the conversation, but the conversation never happens. And I think for us to ask about justice or to ask about accountability and not really look at the institution that perpetuates the type of behavior that we see when it comes to policing and it comes to intimidation, we don't have that conversation. Instead, what we see oftentimes is, they have a cop with a, with a young black kid, and they're hugging each other, and they put it on Instagram, and we all like it, or they say, oh, did you hear about the cops that had the barbecue in the neighborhood? But we never get to have a real human to human conversation, or even inspect the idea of what humanity means through the eyes of a person who is carrying that gun or who has been programmed to act a certain way. So for me, I wanted to kind of get past the programming to put us all on this kind of even ground, so we could really deal with these issues that have been so elusive when it comes to breaking down why these killings are happening. I think it's important to recognize that police destroying black bodies is not new. The very first police were called patty rollers, and their job was to patrol the plantation. So there's no wonder why there's a fractured relationship. But as you said, how do you have these type of conversations of programming, of generational trauma, with someone who is programmed to see your very presence as a threat and programmed not to recognize your humanity? So I felt like the only device I could use was a type of hostile situation. I felt like I had an advantage because I could introduce imagery that none of us had ever seen. And that is the machine guns in the precinct. I often when and hopefully as a painter and filmmaker, you can appreciate this. When I think of a story, the story comes to life in my head before I ever, flush it out or ever, shoot it. And I have images that I say, if I can create this image, then people will pay attention. So when you have these black men with their machine guns pointed at these officers and the flame is coming through, instantly you're like, this is different. This is going to be a different approach to solving a very old problem.
Well, the thing, what you've done is you've turned the judicial system on its side in this case, because one of the things that maybe I'm going to rob people of the pleasure of seeing, I want to say one a quote by Andrei Tarkovsky, who made Andrei Rublev and Stalker and Sacrifice, and a great filmmaker in my mind. And he said that art, like he was talking about film, is a living organism, a living, breathing thing. It's different than life because life contains death, and a representation of life doesn't contain death. So no matter if the subject matter is tragic, the gesture is optimistic. There can never be pessimistic art. There can only be talent and mediocrity. And so I think you've picked a very powerful and what could be disturbing situation, but within that, you've opened up the possibility for this police officer who killed a young boy to actually confront his accuser in this, and his basically, and a mixed jury of criminals, or I don't want to call them, maybe they're not criminals, but they were in jail and they're in orange suits. They're the jury, mixed with the custodian and the clerk and whoever else was in the building when it was taken hostage. And within the course of this, the accused officer says, "I was trained to do this. I did everything I was trained to do. I was trained also to get to the end of the day and to go home to my wife and kids. I did everything I was trained to do." And in the course of that, this guy didn't decide he was going to go kill a kid in the morning. This is something that occurred out of fear, out of self-preservation, out of programming. And so being able to speak to that, and ultimately what has to do with his, which I'm not going to tell, with his case, decides how can we stop this from happening in the future? How do we change this? And the fact is, there's a plausible and excellent solution that is presented. And in a sense, I mean, it's obviously not the same film as 12 Angry Men, but you have articulated a cross-section of people whose voices are so crystalline and lucid, and it's all stuff that you've written. It doesn't seem scripted at all. It's shot as a documentary film, and might have been because of budgetary reasons or whatever, but if necessity is the mother of invention, you pick the most urgent and surgical way of telling the story. So why don't you speak to that for a minute if you feel like it, and then I'd like to ask you something about some of the techniques, but please.
Well, I always knew that I wanted to approach it from the standpoint of a documentary. In fact, when I sat down with the young filmmaker, the young man, Shane Paul McGee, who plays the filmmaker, I took him out to lunch and I said, listen,
really great.
Thank you. Yeah, he's a fantastic young actor. And I said, listen, I want you to be in this film, but understand the film does not belong to the grieving father. The protagonist is the young filmmaker. It is his job to drive and capture the narrative and ultimately make sure that narrative makes it to the very people that need it the most.
Because I don't want your voice to be stymied or commandeered in some kind of way, because I think everybody needs to see this film. And so just like the young filmmaker says in your film, oh, we could maybe get it into some festivals or something. Well, what does that mean, you say? And he says, well, it goes to festivals if the right people like it, and then maybe it goes somewhere, then maybe it gets seen by the world. Okay. The father says, okay, I'm game. I'll go with you here. Anyway, go on. I'm sorry.
Yeah, and then that became the device to the point where he looks into the camera and says, don't stop filming. It was very important for me that we break the fourth wall, and not just break it, but we place it perpetually behind the audience. So they always feel connected to the living text, as if they're experiencing, as if they were there. So they're at every turn, they're being asked to be introspective. At every turn, they're being, pulled across political lines. They're being asked about their programming. They're being asked what they would do in that circumstance. And ultimately, what I hoped it would do, and I feel like it's doing, it is storing up perspective. So when the movie ends, it comes flooding out of that person into their lives. Questions about if they're complicit, the importance of either spreading the word or their contributions to their community. But the film not ending at minute, whatever it is, but it continuing even into this moment. So in everything I did, I not only wanted to create the feeling of a documentary, but I wanted to create the feeling of the audience member being trapped inside of a real life moment.
Yes. I mean, obviously there was some connections with Dog Day Afternoon. You guys were locked up in there. But another thing I just wanted to say, there was another thing I appreciated about the film was that you showed that the officer who killed Link's son was a great guy who unfortunately fell victim to an indoctrinated ideology that continues to plague the criminal justice system. Separating the man from the ideology made the ideology the bad guy and gave the man a chance at redemption. Was that important to you, that the viewer understood that distinction?
It was critical. So often, either when we see films that tackle this material or we hear about it in the media, it's usually the story about a bad cop, a bad apple, a bad seed, someone with a bad track record that just wants to do bad. And I would contest that every police officer of every color has in them the potential to do the very thing that they're programmed to do from the moment they get out of the academy. And that is police in a certain way, profile in a certain way. You know, I interviewed dozens of police officers and I heard dozens of things and they were all completely in alignment. One cop told me, he said, Nate, when we're in nice neighborhoods, what we do in the nice neighborhood is called administrative police officing. It's, how are you, sir? How are you, ma'am? Hope you have a nice day. Thank you, please. Goodbye. He said, but when we're in the jungle, and when he said it, his blood pressure, the vein in his forehead, he says, it's war. They want to kill us. It's like the F out of the car, the fuck on the curb, you know? But we got to be that way. We got to be that way. You got to be hard because they're trying to kill us. And you could just see the difference. And I remember saying to him, I said, okay, well, did you learn that in like a handbook? Like, where's that written? He said, it's not written anywhere. You just know. It's programming. When I went to school to be a computer programmer, my degree was in management science and information systems. And I had a professor that would tell us when we would come to him with a program that wasn't executing, we pushed the button, it's not. He said, Professor, it's not. He said, well, you wrote the code. That program is doing exactly what you programmed it to do. If it's not functioning, go into your little script, find the error, fix the error, push execute, and then the program would do what you want it to do. So I've always been fascinated with that when it comes to society, when it comes to law enforcement specifically. They are programmed to feel a certain way, act a certain way, to consider people a certain way. And there's an error in the code. You can't program an officer to do something. He does it. You put him in jail, everyone applauds. And then the next person in line steps in his shoes, primed to do the very same thing all over again. To me, that is why the film is timely, right? Everyone talks about it. The film's so timely. It's like, well, it's timely, but it would have been timely 10 years ago. Really. You know, it would have been time, and if we're not careful, it'll be timely 50 years from now.
So, talking about the reality, or we're talking about these parallel realities, that of making art. People they don't die in the movie, hopefully. And Fernando Ramos da Silva was killed after Hector Babenco finished making the movie Pichote because he was a kid living in the favela, and then he became famous, and then he was involved in a bank robbery and he was killed. But in your movie, people actually get to walk home after the film because they were acting. But how many I know you had some professional actors there, but were there people that were non-actors that were in your movie also?
Absolutely. So, the only non-professional actors were the people who were portraying the inmates. I worked with a friend of mine, Scott Budnick. He has an organization called the Anti-Recidivism Coalition. And, to get the inmate part right, to get the authentic voice of people who have been marginalized in ways that are described in the Constitution, that are allowed to be treated like enslaved people as they're incarcerated and have had all of their humanity stripped. And oftentimes, as they come home as returning citizens, never get reinstated their humanity. So I go to Scott and I said, are there people that want to be actors? So he gave me a couple people, the young brother Felix Miranda that plays the Latino brother that is speaking to the officer in Spanish.
Yeah,
he was great, returning citizen. The young brother Chris Sykes, who has the Muslim brother, he was also returning citizen. He just come home. And when I spoke to them, because I wrote the words to go in there and for them to speak, and when we rehearsed, I said, listen, I said, I need you to understand that this is an opportunity for you to speak to these people who have marginalized you, who have crushed you to earth for however long you've been caught up in this system. If you could ever speak to them and speak your truth to them and tell them how you feel, what would that look like? I said, that is what I want you to embody as you consider these words. And so it was highly emotional seeing them channeling very personal relationships into the words that they were speaking, and I felt like I had such an advantage because they didn't have to act. This was their reality. They lived it. So,
well, there was no acting. There was no acting. There was no acting going on in your whole movie. The fact is, everybody was there. They were all in the hole with you, and if they all climbed out, you got a day done shooting. Because I didn't see a false note anywhere. It was amazing to Louise and to me. It was amazing what was going on. I mean, that the young man, Jordan, his name was Jordan in the movie. I mean, when you come out of when you say, listen, I'm not feeling so good. I think can you drive the car? Yeah, okay. And then you come out of this house with the police captain. Yeah, I mean, it was absolutely, were we there? We were definitely there. Was it uncomfortable? Yeah. Did the filmmakers get kidnapped too? Yeah. It was absolutely eloquent. And I really think that it's, I mean, after seeing the movie, I asked people, have you seen American Skin? I asked friends of mine. I asked Marty Scorsese if he saw it. I asked Oliver Stone if he saw it. Oliver watched the movie after I called him, and he thought it was absolutely great. I think he wrote you a note. But I called people from the Museum of Modern Art to ask them if they'd seen the movie. Nobody heard about the movie. Why is that? I mean, there was, I called Roger Durling from the Santa Barbara Film Festival. I said, have you seen this movie? It ought to be in the festival. Who do I call? I mean, so I felt a responsibility somehow as a filmmaker, as a person, as a citizen in this world, to kind of contact you, talk to you, and see why this was happening, and make some kind of or help with the platform where people could see it, because I would recommend this movie to every person. I think this is required reading, and it is brilliant. So, what can we do? Well, I guess we're doing this right now, whatever we can do. What do you make of that?
Well, my hope, it's like anything. I'm just an artist. I feel remarkably blessed to be able to be in a field where I can hold people captive for a number of minutes. And if I've done my job properly, they can walk out questioning their minds and their hearts, and hopefully change the way they move, specifically the police officers. The mantra of this film when we were shooting was take a beat, save a life. I sold everyone on the film in the hope that if this film can be seen, the voices of these people who have experienced this can be elevated. The law enforcement officers that we pay to be on the streets could see this, and hopefully just one of them, even just one, wherever they are, after seeing this, maybe finds themselves in some situation years from now, whether we know it and see it or not, if we ever hear about it, you know, they get in a situation where they could pull their gun out and they could kill someone, and they hesitate and they take just a beat and the life is saved, then it would have been worth it. Then who knows? Maybe there can be a shift in this narrative, and there can be one less, you know, bloating body in the sun, shot full of holes from some cop doing what he was programmed and trained, you know, to do. So, you know, you know, the fact that you're interviewing me is I'm still in a daze, because I so respect you and your work.
But the point is that the only way to get a performance like that from people is trust. The only way to get people to come to work for free is trust. The fact that they believe in you and trust you speaks volumes, and what you were able to do with that hard work and that inspiration and all that love. I mean, there's a lot of love in that movie. There's a lot of love in that movie. And when that guy, that police officer, walked out of there, he loved you. He wanted to protect you. And that is a change of roles. And it was, I mean, I think we have to wrap this up soon, but I loved it when there was a black police woman that was there who started to speak up, and when other officer said, "Whose side are you on?" and she says, "Well, I'm on my side, and I'm speaking for myself." And I think that everybody had a voice, and it was, and they should all be heard. So I just want to say thank you for doing it, and whatever I can do to be helpful in any kind of way, I'm absolutely available. It's a masterpiece, and this is the most important movie I think that has been made, not only this year, but for this time. This is what we need to see.
Well,
thanks.
From artist to artist, thank you. It means more than you can imagine. You standing here or sitting here and talking about it, it means everything. You know, so hopefully people will continue to watch it, and conversations will continue to be had, and hopefully we can do what we plan to do, and is change the narrative around our situation, and we don't hand this legacy of trauma and brokenness and death to our children.